and welcome back. We have a WrestleManiacs special tonight, and I want to welcome Crater Mania, the man they call Crater, back and ready to attack with me tonight, talking about Bunkhouse Stampede 1988. Jim Crockett Promotions, bulls. What? You were very, very, very young when this happened. I was young as well.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What months did they have this on? Was
It,
it like,
it
let's
was
see,
January.
January? Okay, so I wasn't even 2 years old yet. I was just like a little over a year old when this event happened. So I didn't learn a lot about this stuff with the NWA until I was a little bit older. I mean, my brother, who's 10 years older than me, he would have been around like 11 years old when this happened. He was a big wrestling fan. He was the reason why I got into it because he kind of introduced me to all that stuff.
Some of my earliest memories, as far as like I was into WWF at this time, and there was another friend of mine. You know, our parents were friends, so he would come over, and he was a big wrestling fan. He was like a good probably 5 years older than me, and he
Mm-hmm.
was the first person that was talking about some of the wrestlers in the NWA, and it was probably around this period here. And as a kid, you know, I was like 7 years old, I think, when this event was happening. I thought NWA, and looking at it now, you can kind of tell. Like I thought the NWA was the real wrestling. Like those guys were really going at it,
Uh,
right? Because WWF was definitely a lot more cookie cutter and more character based. Whereas, and you could definitely see as a kid, you know, this definitely looked more legit. You didn't have any pads around ringside or anything. You didn't really have too many over the top, you know, characters like WWF had at the time. But, you know, this was at the tail end of when Vince was like taking over all the territories and everything.
yeah.
And Jim Crockett Promotions, the NWA, was one of the last holdouts. I think AWA was technically still around this time, but they were very like low tier. And WWF and NWA slash WCW is what it'd later be called later on in the year. They were kind of closer, right? I don't know if anybody was right at the level of, you know, Hulkamania and WWF in the 80s, but they were definitely second. So
Oh yeah.
I thought this would be a fun one to talk about some of the history behind these shows because this was the second Jim Crockett Promotions pay per view. Now, when I think the NWA first started the closed circuit thing in like the early 80s, where people would, and this, I mean, to me, this would be cool. I would like to do this now where they would gather at like movie theaters
Yeah.
and they would have a closed circuit feed in bigger cities and watch. Like, I think Starcade 83 was like the first one that they did and continuing on there. And even the first couple of WrestleManias, I think, were closed circuit. Was WrestleMania 3 the first actual pay per view? I can't
Um,
remember.
I don't know because I may be getting it mixed up, but I was thinking like the first WrestleMania was like when they were doing the closed circuit showings and stuff at movie theaters, but that may have been WrestleMania 3. I can't really remember.
Well, I mean, the closed circuit was definitely 1 and 2. I'm pretty sure it's closed
Okay,
circuit.
but
But I
you're
was
talking about
wondering
just a
if,
regular pay per view was
yeah,
like, yeah, I don't. I'm not sure about that. But you mentioned something about how you wish they would start kind of doing that again. I know in some locations earlier this year with WrestleMania 40, they were showing it in like theaters and stuff. So I don't know if that's going to become a regular thing from now on with WWE and
mm,
WrestleMania.
we'll have to see. But I mean, I doubt anywhere near here would be doing that. But
Oh no, no,
um,
I doubt it.
the Bunkhouse Stampede, though, from '88. So this was January the 24th, 1988, which, oddly enough, WWF on USA Network for free hosted the original Royal Rumble to compete with with the Bunkhouse Stampede, which is funny because really, if you look at this show, I mean, I wasn't like an active viewer at the time watching this promotion, but like you wouldn't think, you know, I mean, there's nothing huge on here that would get Vince upset. You wouldn't think, but I mean, evidently he thought pay per view was his, and he was trying to put them out of business.
Well, honestly, I think that the people working in the NWA at the time were more upset with the event than what Vince would have been because, and no disrespect to Dusty Rhodes because he's one of my all-time favorites, but this was at the time when he was booking for NWA,
Hmm.
and going into this event, this was the third Bunkhouse Stampede, I think, that they had done,
Hmm.
and so after the event was said and done, I know a lot of people within the company were not happy with how the event played out.
Yeah, and I don't think it got good reviews or anything either from fans or critics alike.
Mm,
But this wasn't the first NWA pay per view, though. The Starcade from the year prior in '87 was the first pay per view, and
mm,
WWF again, or well, this was the first time, would Survivor Series, man. So Royal Rumble and Survivor Series both stemmed from just wanting to put the NWA out of business. That's so strange to think about. And it's still around today, a good 24 years or something after WCW is out of business.
yeah, Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins now owns NWA.
I guess yeah, they're technically still around. I don't know what they're doing with it. I haven't heard anything, but
Well, there for a while, I don't know. I haven't kept up with it in a while now, but I know they were doing a show like on YouTube called NWA Power Hour, and it was the stage setup and everything was just like how NWA was in the '80s. When they would have like the entranceway and there's the ring kind of set up in the center of the arena, and then towards the entranceway they had like a little stage where they would have like an announcer that would like
hmm.
do interviews and stuff with different wrestlers. So they were doing that for at least a while. I don't know about now with NWA, and it's interesting that they because that's like you said, like NWA at this time, what in the '80s was kind of set around like a more realistic type, wrestling, more believable, like it was kind of like it was real. So, and I think that that's what they're kind of going for again with the current product of NWA, because that's basically, I guess that's what Billy Corgan, he kind of grew up on
Hmm.
that product, and he wanted to go forward with doing that again. That same style.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think like, what is it? AEW is number two. Then what would you say? TNA maybe number three.
I mean, yeah, if you're looking at it unbiased, but I think that TNA's product right now, especially after the announcement, they're partnering with WWE, going to be
Hmm.
doing kind of cross brand stuff from now on. I'm thinking TNA is eventually going to end up being that number two over AEW because with AEW's current product, man, I don't see how they're going to last for another 5 years.
I mean, they'll last as long as Tony Khan's dad wants to pay for it.
Well,
It's
yeah,
basically that's.
that's true.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have been around now. I think like the TV rights deal, they're at least getting some good money back for it, from what I understand at this point. So at least they're not 100% going in the hole like they were like last year. But anyway,
Yeah.
getting into this pay per view here, it's always fun to talk about the dark matches, the
Mm.
matches that weren't recorded, or they didn't keep them around. This is on. I watched it on Peacock. It looked like they had the pay per view feed on Peacock, which is what I prefer actually. Although sometimes, like you're like, what the hell? Like, I think what was it, SummerSlam '91? They didn't have any of the after party shit that everybody remembers or whatever on the pay per view version. But this is the only version of this that's out there. So this was not one that they had put on VHS or anything. So for many years, I don't know if people just bootlegged the hell out of this from the pay per view feed. But yeah, this was one of those shows that they didn't put a Turner or home video version of Outback in the
No.
late 80s.
And I think what happened was and I think I remember reading when I was doing some research on this after I watched it, um, that first match on the event between Nikita Koloff and Bobby Eaton, I think that was a televised match that wasn't even part of the event that we were seeing. That's why it looks like the quality of the video is a little bit different from the rest of the matches on the card.
Hmm.
So it seems like they edited that in or something. I think, but I don't know if there's any truth to that or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They did mention on here though before the event aired live, there's a tag team match, and I would have loved to seen this, but I don't know if they even recorded it. I have no idea. Sting and Jimmy Garvin defeated the Sheep Herders, who would quickly move on to WWF. Like I think that they were in WWF in like '88 as well, or maybe
Hmm.
early '89. But Butch Miller and Luke Williams, the Bushwhackers, by disqualification, non televised tag team match. Now, it was advertised that the Rock and Roll
Rose
Express
Reyes,
versus
yep.
the Sheep Herders were going to be the opening match, but Rock and Roll Daddy, they left town. They quit the company, I think, around this time, so
They did,
they
yeah.
switched it
And
up.
that was another issue with this whole event is that there was a couple things that were scheduled for the event, but there was no mention of the changes or anything. So they just kind of rode with the flow, like and just like well, what you see is what you get. Because there's a whole other thing like with that on the main event for the Bunkhouse Stampede steel cage match, where a bunch of there was like I think two or three other guys that were supposed to be a part of that match,
Right.
but
Don't you think like the companies pre-internet could get away with that shit a lot easier than they could now? Like they pretty much are forced to explain this stuff now. They can't just say, "Oh, we'll just
well,
forget about it."
yeah, because it was just kind of a thing, I guess, in like the '80s and the '90s with any wrestling promotion that since there was no internet, there was nobody like leaking stuff out there, unless it was like in one of the wrestling magazines that were being released at the time. That was about the most that you would get as far as any kind of inside information on wrestling
Mhm.
is with the magazines and or just kind of word of mouth. But like, I think the generations that were like at that time into wrestling in the '80s and '90s, they just kind of accepted whatever was being put out there for them.
We're at the start of the pay-per-view. This is in Uniondale, New York, which I thought was interesting. That may be another reason Vince was kind of pissed off. You
Oh
got the
yeah,
NWA up in his territory. Nassau Coliseum, which is a WWF arena, they only drew 6,000 people. It's a 16,000 seat arena. And the way that they lit the arenas then, too, you couldn't really tell because it was all like completely dark. But I love the look that they went for there. They with the ring lights and everything, and
hmm
the that old green and blue around the ring, the logo and everything. So,
which that,
but
that reminds me of like the house shows and stuff that you go to nowadays, like with the WWE house shows. Like their lighting is kind of similar to what it was, the actual televised events that NWA did. And I like that. I always feel, to me, I always have more fun at house shows than I do like stuff that's like Raws or
right,
SmackDowns or pay per views or anything like that.
yeah, especially well, they're not really doing as many house shows now though, which is unfortunate. But Jim Ross and Bob Caudle were announcing. Tony Schiavone was the ring announcer,
Hmm.
which is pretty interesting here. And I was looking this up too because I was like, Bob Caudle, whatever happened to him? He is still alive, man.
Really,
Bob Caudle, I think he's like 90 years old.
and that was. I don't have much knowledge when it comes to Bob Caudle, but like watching that event back, Bunkhouse Stampede, I'm not real big on him as a commentator because it didn't seem like he was super knowledgeable about the product.
I think at that point in time, he was only doing like special events. I may be mistaken, but he'd been around year for many, many years, and I think originally was like a weatherman or something like that, and just was helping out with the. That's how he got into wrestling, evidently. So, but yeah, it's hard to believe that he's still around because he looked kind of old here, and this was
Yeah,
what
that's crazy. This is
35 years ago or whatever it is.
something like that.
But opening match, we'll talk about it's in the green and pink bulls. I always thought when I was watching the Midnight Express and Beautiful Bobby and all these guys, when I was a kid, I was like, well, they must be getting some sort of special deal on these ugly fucking tights. Like this is like clearance tights. But Jim Cornette was with Beautiful Bobby versus the Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff, baby, for the NWA Television Championship.
Oh yeah, this is a good match too. And it ended up going to a time limit draw. And it's entertaining to me because throughout the whole match, I mean, it's like he's nonstop outside the ring. Jim Cornette, you could hear his mouth throughout the whole match, just trash talking Nikita Koloff, and yeah, I mean, it was a really good back and forth match. I mean, they kind of went all around the ring on the outside, and just you don't see a lot of that style of wrestling anymore, at least in the WWE. I mean, you may like over in Japan or some of these little independent promotions, but that style is what made me fall in love with wrestling.
Hmm. And Beautiful Bobby was one of those guys too. It seems like he was always around. Like he was
Hmm.
always in. He never left, did he? He was always in WCW or NWA. And unfortunately, after the Midnight Express era, like they really didn't do a whole lot with him. I mean, he was with Steven Regal, the
Yeah,
Blue
the Blue
Blood thing.
Bloods. Yep.
That was probably the most that they did with him, aside from the Midnight Express stuff, which
'Cause-
is unfortunate. But
And what was his name when he was with the Blue Bloods?
Earl Robert Eaton, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was yeah, it was a good time.
And funny thing though, my wife hates Jim Cornette, so I listen to that
Oh
podcast
no,
all the time.
man!
And she got a kick out of seeing how young he was though here, and looked it up. I think she said like around this time he was like 26 years old.
Oh
So
wow.
very young Jim Cornette. Um, and in my opinion, I think he has the best wrestling podcast of all time. I don't think there's anything even
Well,
close.
yeah, I thought that for the longest time, but I don't know, man. I'm enjoying Undertaker's podcast pretty good nowadays. I think it definitely rivals Jim Cornette's.
I've listened to a couple of them. I saw the one where Donald Trump was basically interviewing the Undertaker, which is fucking hilarious. He has the guy running for president on his show, and he's like talking to him for the first 15 minutes about his career
Right.
in wrestling. But yeah, I like Cornette's quite a bit. Dutch Mantel's is pretty good too. Good storytellers, like that's the ones that and Undertaker's is good. I just haven't
Yeah,
checked out a
man.
whole lot of his stuff.
It's just so weird too because like we're Undertaker for what 30 years or whatever. He stayed in character. He never put any of his like real life persona out there for anybody. And I think the first time he kind of did it was when they did that Last Ride documentary series.
Hmm.
Is when he was kind of like opening up about all that. But just to listen to him on this podcast he does now, I mean, it's so wild some of the stories that he tells, and the best episode so far that I've seen is that there's one with Mark Henry and there's one with Teddy Long, and
Hmm.
those are by far my two favorite episodes so far with that
Yeah,
show.
Teddy Long was one of his early managers, I think, when they were the
Hmm.
skyscrapers or whatever.
Yep.
And there's like a really early promo that Undertaker did that is floating around on Instagram. That shit was fucking terrible. It's very entertaining though. But continuing on, we only have what 4 matches on the show.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And
But
before we go to the next match, I just want to mention like at the end of that match with Nikita Koloff, he's getting his ass beat by the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette,
mhm.
and I don't understand why Dusty didn't come out and help Nikita Koloff. I mean, I understand he had a match later in the night or
Well,
whatever, but
he wanted to save that pop for later. He didn't want to come out twice.
because they were feuding with the Midnight Express at that time too. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I guess you're right about the whole he's saving that pop for later.
Midnight Express wouldn't last much longer, though, I don't think, in the promotion, if I'm not mistaken, because Cornette would have the dynamic dudes coming along within
Yeah.
the next year or so. They were definitely fucking with him with that. I can tell you. Larry Zbyszko with Baby Doll versus Barry Windham for the NWA Western States Heritage Championship. A lot of people brag the lineage of that historic championship up quite a bit.
Yeah, and it's always weird to me because like when I got into wrestling in the early '90s. I didn't know a whole lot about Zbyszko, and then and the times that I did see him on TV, I didn't pay whole lot of attention to him until like in the Nitro years came along, and he was a commentator. That's when I started kind of becoming a fan of him. So as I would go back and look at those older matches when he was doing this stuff with the NWA or when he was with the Dangerous Alliance,
Mm-hmm.
Paul E's Dangerous's group. I mean, I really appreciate that stuff now that I'm older. And he was a very underrated, like old school wrestler, Larry Zbyszko.
Oh yeah, I mean this is one of those guys too that looked like he was 50 years old for 20 years.
Yeah,
Larry Zbyszko and Baby Doll's high heel come into play
yeah, and
here, and I mean I think the problem for NWA wrestling and for younger kids is, and you could tell with the crowd at this show as well, like these matches are all long. They're longer. There's only four, so they all had to be kind of long,
right.
and they needed to mix it up a little bit. They needed to have, something out there for the younger audience. And this was, I mean, this is a great technical old school like Southern wrestling match. But I think that's the one thing I noticed from this show is they didn't really switch that up like they should have, and it was another long match. What was it? It was 20. It was 19 minutes and
No,
16 seconds. First match was 20 minutes.
right.
Um,
Well, yeah, about right on
so
the dot of being the same amount of time as the first match. But when I was rewatching that event and the end of the Zbyszko and the Barry Windham match, that finish that they use with Baby Doll's high heel, if I'm not mistaken, that's the same exact finish that they use in '96 in WCW when Macho Man and Flair were feuding with one another, and
yeah,
Elizabeth turns on Macho Man and joins Flair. I'm pretty sure it's the same exact
it
finish.
could have been. Yeah, I know they used a high heel quite a bit with like. I know there was a match with Hogan and a high heel as well. I don't know if it was
Mm,
Elizabeth or Woman or it was one of those, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it had to be because I think they might have been doing that same thing at the time, like where I might be getting my timeline mixed up, but I was thinking that might have had something to do with the storyline in WCW they were doing with the alliance to end Hulkamania. It was like the Dungeon of Doom teamed up with the Four Horsemen, and they were
that's a
feuding.
show we got to do in the future.
Yeah, it's a
That
good.
triple decker cage show. God
Yeah,
damn, man! What?
that's a
Remember the? I think it was the same show where they had the Black Top Bully and Dustin Rhodes in that damn moving. What was it? A moving truck
oh,
with
tractor trailer.
yeah, tractor
Yeah,
trailer truck with pigs and shit in it. What the
it,
hell were they
I'm not
doing?
sure that might have been the same event. I can't remember. God, it's been so long since I've seen it though. But I
I
was
think
just
it
talking.
was. I think it was like uncensored 95 or something like that.
Yeah, maybe or 95 or 96 one.
Yeah, 95 or 96. But I think Dustin was in WWF by 96. So I'm not sure. I might be getting it confused with another show, but
Well, I
that
know.
triple that triple
Yeah,
decker cage match was jeez.
yeah, I think you're right. I think Goldust started in WWF late '95 because I think when he came in, his first feud was with Razor Ramon, if I remember right.
It's real easy to get a couple shows mixed together though because they're especially in WCW around that time before the NWO started. Like you can go like a 2 or 3 year period there and just be totally confused because it's all the same from when Hogan started until really the NWO began. So a good what 2 years or so.
Right.
But continuing on, This was kind of interesting, and I didn't know the backstory behind this one. I don't know if you looked into it, but
Hmm.
Road Warrior Hawk with Paul Ellering versus Ric Flair with J.J. Dillon. Another long match, 21 minutes, 39 seconds. And Road Warrior Hawk wins by disqualification. It's kind of a bullshit ending for pay per view, especially when you
Yeah.
had, all these were pretty much the Zbyszko and Barry Windham's a screw job finish. Nikita Koloff and Bobby Eaton was like a time limit draw. So, well, I wonder what the pay per view was back then. Probably at least what, $30 maybe, 20 or $30. So you're not really giving the fans too much for their money here. A bunch of bullshit finishes. But Road Warrior Hawk, I wonder what led up to was Animal. I know he had a lot of back problems around this time period. Wonder what happened there. Did you ever did you look that up or you know?
Yeah, I read a little bit on it, and it just so I think that before this event, um, Flair and Arn Anderson had a match against the Road Warriors, and that was basically it. And like the next week, they just had announced on I think like WCW Saturday Night or whatever that you know, Flair was going to be facing Hawk at Bunkhouse Stampede. So there
Mm-hmm.
was really no huge build up to this, but I mean, it's a fantastic match of what they had, even though the ending of it sucks. But you know, they never really did anything else with Hawk and the world title or any chase after the world title after that. I don't think either.
Yeah, I think the popularity of the Road Warriors was so big around this time that either one of those guys could have been main event wrestlers.
Mhm.
And then, shortly after this, again, it was within the next year or so, they would leave and sign with WWF and,
Yeah.
were there for a few years. Man, one thing that I noticed though, I mean, there were technical issues in this as well. They put up, which I don't
Mhm.
know the history of that. Maybe that was why it never came out on tape.
Right.
The match was kind of screwed up from the beginning or whatever, and they had a little message on the screen about a technical issue.
Yeah, it just goes straight into the match. There's no intro for either one of those guys. It just kind of goes straight into after the Larry Zbyszko and Barry Windham match. It just goes straight into like you see Flair and Hawk in the ring, ready to start the match, and
Hmm.
that's it.
And Magnum TA, I think, was also out there too. And this was after the accident as well. I think a couple of years. So he had made random appearances on shows. But yeah, it's very unfortunate what happened with his short-lived career and everything. And one thing that I noticed on here though was just how freakishly huge Hawk was. I mean, I couldn't imagine seeing a son of a bitch that size in person.
And it seems like he was always that size though, until like maybe the late '90s when he was having all his like drinking problems and all that stuff. But he was Hawk was always a huge built guy.
Yeah. Well, and this here too, he's still really young, and you can kind of use Flair as like just a normal sized dude. Who the fuck is going to do anything with that big son of a bitch? Jesus
And that
Christ, he's scary looking.
That reminds me though, have you ever seen there's this video out there on the internet of it's probably around this same time period in NWA, and it's just like this backstage home video, like Dusty's in it, the Road Warriors, Luger's in it. They show Sting, Nikita Koloff, just a bunch of different guys, and they're just all back there like just doing drugs and shit.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that. It was around a few years ago, right?
Yeah, it's if nobody's ever seen that video, I suggest you seek that out. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, come on, baby, give me that line of cocaine, if you will. Snort
Man,
that shit.
but like during that time period of wrestling, no matter what promotion those guys were in, I mean, there was a lot of drugs happening before they even came out there to the ring.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it was a different time, man. And it's sad too because a lot of the guys died very young. Like
Yeah.
Hawk was what, he was in his early 40s maybe when he died. Maybe not even that old. I don't even know, but like,
I want to say he was 38 when he
yeah.
died.
And yeah, so I mean this was a pretty good match. Both of these guys in their prime. Hawk was big too, and I wanted to mention like there's a lot of guys like Ultimate Warrior that were big and cut and everything. Hawk didn't have that physique. He just had a big ass kicker's physique, really. Like he was just thick. His arms were gigantic. He just looked like somebody you didn't want to mess with.
Yeah, for sure. Like that's what I was thinking too. Like it's just a guy that you don't want to piss off.
Right.
Because you know a lot of you hear these stories about wrestlers going to bars and stuff, and fans will try to like pester them or whatever. And that's not a guy back during that time that you would want to fuck with for sure.
No. And I'm willing to bet most people in person, if they saw him out, they didn't even try it. They'd have to be really fucked up to try. That's all I'm going to say about that. But after this match, though, and this was something that kind of brought me back there just for a day, there's intermission. Man, they had like an intermission, and I guess this was kind of buying them time to put that big cage up, the bunkhouse cage.
Yeah.
But this was a regular thing on pay-per-views around this time period, it's very weird. I remember going to the WrestleMania that I went to, WrestleMania 8.
Mm-hmm.
They had, and this was before, like they started it earlier in the evening. I think it was like 4 o'clock or something in the evening. And they had an intermission that was like an hour break or something like that. And if you've got like some of the old pay-per-view feeds from some of these old WWF or even NWA pay-per-views, a lot of them had that like an hour or 20, 30-minute intermissions. So I wonder when that stopped, because that's just I don't know, it's kind of a time capsule thing that nobody really talks about.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the stuff that WWF was doing in the mid '90s when they would have the free for alls before the actual pay per view would start, or whether it be like in your house or whatever. It would always kind of just a lot of time wasters was just happening in those type of things.
Yeah, but it did give them a chance to put this cage up. Now, the Bunkhouse Stampede is not a gimmick match that a lot of people, sing the praises about today. You don't hear anybody talk about it.
Well,
And the reason why I think is because of the rules. Like,
yeah, the rules are stupid. They're just so fucking stupid. Why? I mean, one of the rules is that you have to eliminate your opponent by putting them either through the door of the cage, which is reasonable.
right.
But the other option you have is putting them over the top of the cage to the outside.
Right. Throwing them over the cage.
Why is that even an option?
I don't know. When I saw it, I was like, why would anybody even get up on the top rope then? That makes no sense.
No, I don't know. But again, like I said earlier, no disrespect to Dusty. This was his booking. I think he's the one that invented the match.
He won all of them too, I believe.
He won, and that was another controversial thing with the boys in the back. They did not like it that Dusty had been booked to win that match 3 years in a row.
Who would have thought it, baby? I got my big boot trophy. I think that big boot trophy was on eBay a few years ago as well. I don't know what it sold for.
I would love to have a replica of that, honestly.
That thing was gigantic. I wonder what it was made out of.
I don't know. It looks like brass or bronze or something.
If it was that thing would have to weigh about 100 pounds at that size.
Definitely.
You would think.
I would say it did.
But it could have been like, I don't know. They could have made it out of plastic and painted it bronze. I don't know.
But I guess that was Dusty's decision too, to have that boot trophy, because he was known for wearing cowboy boots like that with his wrestling gear. So I imagine that was his idea to do that.
And I guess they had like tournament matches over the weeks ahead that determined who was in the actual Bunkhouse Stampede match. Mm-hmm. So we'll go through the entrance here. You had, of course, the American Dream, the son of a plumber, Dusty. You had Tully Blanchard, Ivan Koloff. It's kind of interesting. He was, I think he's passed away now, but like he was an older. He was at least in his late 40s, early 50s then, I would imagine.
Yeah. He sticks out like a sore thumb in that match to me, though, too.
Yeah. Warlord, who's another one, is gigantic. God, what a freakishly big dude that guy is. Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, the Barbarian, who's a hell of a storyteller, by the way. I would
Yeah.
have never thought
Barbarian's,
that.
he's a killer guy, too,
Yeah, if
man.
you can look up some of his shoot interviews here on YouTube, they're great. And Road Warrior Animal. If you wondered where the other Road Warrior was, he's in this match here. And yeah, like you were saying, you get eliminated by either going out the cage door or over top of the cage, which I don't
Yeah.
think anybody went over the top of the cage, right? They may have, I think, wasn't it?
No. Ivan Koloff got
Yeah,
eliminated
that's what I
by.
was thinking, but he just, it's not like he fell from the cage. He just gradually, like, climbed down almost. That would have been killer had they had, like, this match later on where the Giant and Rey Mysterio was in there, where the Giant literally probably could have threw him actually over the cage. That would have been great.
Didn't Barbarian did that how the finish goes? Didn't Dusty put Barbarian over the top of that cage too?
I'm not sure. He may have.
I know they were the final two, but I can't remember. It seems like he did.
But I mean, just the whole idea of, okay, if that's how you can get eliminated, why would anybody even go on the ropes?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes no sense. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to like analyze it and try to make sense of it as I was watching it, and I said, well, maybe it's just one of those things where, like, if you're looking as if it was real, like, well, if you're going to have to eliminate your opponent over the top of the cage, yeah, you can just try to, like, I guess, maneuver them up onto the ropes and just try to get up there and pull them up there with you. But again, that's still stupid as fuck.
Yeah. I don't know what they're thinking there, but anyway, the winner of the match gets $500,000 and the Big Boot Championship. And it was pretty much a faces versus a heel. I mean, even though it's every man for himself, supposedly, but they tried their best throughout the entire match that it was face versus heel. They didn't really mix it up very much. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it's just and another thing is that there were three other guys that were supposed to be in that match. I believe it was Dr. Death Steve Williams, Big
Mhm.
Bubba Rogers, and I don't remember this guy, but it says his name was the Mighty Wilbur. I don't remember that guy.
What happened to the Mighty Wilbur? That's sad.
But
Kicked him
the
out.
explanation for him, Mighty Wilbur not being in that match is because he got injured. But Big Bubba Rogers and Dr. Death Steve Williams not in the final match, even though they were supposed to be. But again, there was no explanation there as to why they weren't in the match.
Maybe like Big Bubba Rogers, he would be the big boss man fairly soon after. I don't know when he debuted, but I think it was right around this time.
I think it was in the next year when Big Boss Man came in to WWF in '89, because it wasn't too long into his career as Big Boss Man is when he started teaming up with yourself as the Twin Towers.
Is that right? No, that's the woke creepy Kentuckian. That's another man. But the match was fun for what it was. It was fun to see everybody, go back in time and everything. But it was a shitty concept for a match. I don't think anybody would argue with that. The pay-per-view was pretty much criticized, not known as one of the better pay-per-views. A lot of people, like you were saying, complaining about Dusty's booking and everything, and he won the Bunkhouse Stampede match yet again. And you got to think, man, like Dusty had been wrestling even at this point for close to probably 30 years. At this point, he had been wrestling, I think, since like the late '60s, early '70s. So, yeah, kind of.
Well, that would just and by '88, I think that would just be like 15, 20 years or something.
Yeah, well, if he was wrestling, I think he started in like '70, right? So yeah, it'd be about 20 years or so.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, he's still like the booker, and this match is the third one, and he won it again. Like I don't know. But
Let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that if Dusty had never been the booker for the NWA, do you think that his legacy would have been even more than what it is today? Do you think because you think that they kind of he got held back because of his like booking, and a lot of guys maybe not didn't like him or something?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people don't really look at his booking very much when they just think about his career now because this was like a really down period. I think. How long did he book for? Like he left not too long after this as
Yeah,
well.
but he was booking for NWA for a good while there, and I think when he eventually came back to WCW in the '90s, he was doing him and Kevin Sullivan both were doing a little bit of booking for WCW. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, shortly after this, what the polka dot gimmick started,
Yeah,
which is weird because like
Common Man.
when he started initially, he didn't have the polka dots,
Oh,
and then they're like, oh, we're going. He's starting to get over a little bit. We're going to give him the polka dots, and then he gets over even more. And then they put Sweet Sapphire with him, wanting to fuck
yeah.
with him some more because they thought he was racist, and he got over even more.
As far as like the aftermath of this whole event, I think that even though this event itself wasn't um, critically acclaimed or anything, the aftermath of this gave us one of the best like eras of the Four Horsemen because that Luger was in this match, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard was in, and so right after this event is when Luger started this whole feud with the Horsemen,
Mm-hmm.
and and there was Barry Windham was thrown in there, and that's when Barry Windham like shortly he joined the Horsemen. And to me, that's one of the best eras of the Four Horsemen is with
Yeah,
Barry Windham.
the company definitely had some interesting stuff going on the next couple of years, and then they had that down period there. Whenever Flair left,
Hmm.
and that's just a whole different thing. I think it was around like the what early '91 or mid '91, something like that. They had a huge down period for at least 3 or 4 years until they signed Hogan, and then more people, kind of that kind of changed the whole company though. So, but yeah, '88 through like '99, early '91 is pretty solid era. I mean, it's fun to watch.
Yeah.
The first time I actually really got hardcore into the company though was around '93, I think, '92, '93, when they had the amnesia angle with Cactus Jack. Like that
Yeah.
was the one where I kind of got hooked, like storyline wise, and kind of kept up with it on the WCW Saturday Night Show. And the shows themselves were a lot easier to find on TV than
Hmm.
WWF at the time for me because I remember the WWF shows aside from the USA Network stuff like Primetime Wrestling, all the shows were syndicated. So unless you had a TV guide and checked every week, you didn't know where they were at. Whereas NWA was always on at 6:05 on TBS on Saturday nights, so you knew where to go.
Yeah, and speaking of primetime wrestling, I recently found this YouTube channel that has a ton of episodes of primetime wrestling uploaded, and they're all unedited.
Hmm.
So those are I've been watching some of those here lately, and they're really fun.
Oh yeah.
Like I think the one I watched the other day was right after the main event match between Andre and Hogan,
Hmm.
where they had the two referees, and Andre gives the belt to Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase, and that host like, "How much did the plastic surgery cost, brother?"
I
like
remember that. I
he
totally
just
bought into that too when I saw that as a
man,
kid.
it's so
I was
good.
like, yeah, that was a great time too. So, but guys, I guess that is it for the Bunkhouse Stampede '88. This was the last Bunkhouse Stampede match as well. At least on this, the first and only on pay per view. They may have done them for house shows or something. I don't know. But yeah, I think where Dusty was gone by the next year, they just decided to nix it. They was like, no,
Yeah, they was
let's not
going
do
in a
this.
different direction at that time. So yeah.
Another little fun anecdote that I was looking up on here. This was January 24th, '88. They didn't do another pay per view in January until the NWO sold out pay per view in January of '97.
97. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I
which
didn't know that. That's interesting though.
I watched live, and that's a very weird show too. That'd be a fun one to take a look at some point.
Oh, I love 97 Sold Out. It's so, it's so good, man. Like
Yeah,
especially, I just remember like during the matches, like they'll have like this little voice over the match, like it's called the WCW guys. They go loser.
this was. Yeah, we'll do a show on that at some point, talk more
Yeah,
about
it'd
it.
be
But this was
fun.
early on. Like I think I had just gotten DirecTV around this time, and that was one of those pay-per-views that I watched live, and I was like, "What the hell is going on? This is just so odd." But it was way ahead of its time, man, for sure. I think,
Yeah,
but
it starts off with the NWO hanging on the back of a garbage.
yeah, I haven't watched it in many years, so that'd probably be a good one to
Oh, it'd
go
be
back and
fun, sure.
and check out. But yeah, Crater, I appreciate you joining me on here. Everybody, check out his channel as
Yeah.
well, Crater Mania on YouTube. I don't know if you're going to do any wrestling stuff maybe in the future on there.
Yeah, I'm right now. Like I'm focusing on the movie stuff where I'm watching 500 movies in 2025. But I've been playing around with some ideas of how I want to expand the channel throughout the year and just kind of put some other like non-movie stuff related stuff on like wrestling
You could
or like
review wrestling movies.
yeah. Well, I'm going to do that. I do have that planned at some point. Um, but I want to do just talk about just different eras, kind of like what this podcast is kind of based around too. Just and just other things, whatever I can come up with, I guess.
Cool. So I guess the next thing that we're going to do though is on Saturday night, February the 1st, it is the Royal Rumble 2025 from Indianapolis, Indiana. Not too far up the road here actually. I was thinking about going to that, but man, the ticket prices,
Yeah,
I'm fine watching it at home. It's too
yeah,
much money
same.
too
I
much
I
money to
wanted to
spend.
I wanted to go as well because this is probably going to be the last time for a while that it's going to be relatively close to us. And I've never been to a Royal Rumble event. That's my favorite event that WWE puts on. But I don't know. Maybe it'll come back around one of these days. I know that Nashville is currently in the process of building a new stadium, so maybe that's a possibility.
But yeah, we'll be doing like a post show on that. That's always an exciting event. And next year they're doing it in Saudi Arabia, which I'm not a fan of.
Yeah, I'm
I
not going
know
to that.
we'll definitely not be going to that. And we'll be watching it at like 2 o'clock in the day or whatever it is
Mhm.
whenever they start. So, eh, you know. But we appreciate everybody tuning in and everything. And definitely give us your thoughts and opinions on Bunkhouse Stampede 88 in the comments. And we will catch you guys next time.